Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Central Asia Metals PLC Annual General Meeting and Investor Presentation. Throughout this recorded meeting, attendees online will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged in connection with the investor presentation and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions at any time and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question submitted today. However, all questions will be reviewed with responses published on the Investor Meet Company platform where it is appropriate to do so. I'll now like to hand you over to Non-Executive Chairman of Central Asia Metals, Mr. Nick Clark. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Nick Clark, and I would like to welcome you to this annual general meeting of Central Asia Metals PLC, our 12th AGM since our listing on AIM in 2010. I would like to welcome those watching online via the Investor Meet Company platform. And with us today are my colleagues on the board, Nigel Robinson, our Chief Executive Officer, Gavin Farrar, our Chief Financial Officer, a new joiner to the board, Mike Armitage, who's our most recently appointed Non-Exec Director, Robert Cathry, Roger Davey, Gillian Davidson, Mike Prentice, David Swan, and Nurlan Zakupov are our other non-executive directors. Louise Rathel, who will be joining the board as Director of Corporate Development at the conclusion of the AGM, is also with us today. Before we proceed, I would like to set out the running order for today's proceedings in line with the notice of meeting sent to shareholders in April. I expect the formal AGM to be a brief meeting at which we handle the formalities required in connection with this. The voting at this will be by a poll to ensure all votes lodged in advance are taken into account, and the results of the AGM will be announced to the market later today. Once this briefing has concluded, we will then move on to the presentation from management. Now, turning to the formal business of the AGM, the necessary quorum being present, I now declare the annual general meeting open. The business of the meeting is set out in the notice of meeting contained in the circular to shareholders dated 21st of April 2022 and distributed with the annual report and accounts. With your approval, I would like to take the notice of meeting as read. Is that agreed? Thank you. The notice is taken as read. I should now be happy to answer any questions in connection with the business of the annual general meeting. As I intend to call a poll on all resolutions, I should be grateful if all questions in connection with the business of the annual general meeting be asked at this stage. There will be an opportunity to ask general questions during the investor presentation after the formal meeting is concluded. As there are no questions, in connection with the business of the AGM, I shall now turn to the formal business of the meeting, being the resolution set out in the notice of meeting. In accordance with the company's Articles of Association, and to enable all proxies lodged in advance to be taken into account, I now demand a poll be taken on all the resolutions set out in the notice of meeting. There are 9 resolutions. Resolutions 1 to 7 are being taken as ordinary resolutions, which require a simple majority of the votes cast to be passed. And resolutions 8 and 9 are being taken as special resolutions, which require approval of at least 75% of the votes cast to be passed. I now declare the poll open. Will those shareholders, proxy holders, and corporate representatives wishing to vote please complete a poll card now and pass these to the company secretary. Thank you. I plan to close the poll shortly. If there are any other poll cards to be submitted, please pass those to me now. Thank you. There being no further poll cards to be submitted, the poll is now closed. Our company secretary and registrars will be counting the votes cast at this meeting. The result of the poll will be available later today and will be announced to the London Stock Exchange as soon as practical. Finally, before we close the meeting, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Bob Catherine, Bobsy, who steps down from the board today. Bob has made an exceptional contribution to the company and this board over the last 15 years, and I thank him very much indeed for his help and support during that period. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the business of the AGM. So I now declare the meeting closed. I will now hand over to Nigel Robinson, our CEO, to give a presentation of the company.
Okay, thanks very much, Nick. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and those of you online. If we go through the slides, first of all, standard disclaimer, read that at your leisure. Just a quick reminder of where we operate. We operate in 2 countries. So we're operating in Kazakhstan, which is the 9th largest country in the world, where we have our KOUNRAD operation. That's an in-situ dump leach and SXEW processing plant. It's been in production now. We just celebrated 10 years of production. The life of operation is out to 2034. And our production in 2021 was 14,041 tonnes. And our guidance for this year is 12,500 to 13,500 tonnes of copper cathode. On the back of success at Kazakhstan, a KOUNRAD project, we bought the North Macedonian SASA underground lead and zinc mine in late 2017. And production commenced there in 1960s, and the life of mine of that particular mine is out to 2037. Our production last year was 22,167 tonnes of zinc and 27,202 tonnes of lead. And our guidance for this year is 20 to 22,000 tonnes of zinc and 27 to 29,000 tonnes of lead. Just the highlights of last year's numbers, which many of you will be familiar with by now. We had a record year for CAML, $235 million of revenue and generating EBITDA of $141.5 million. That's a margin of 60%, up from 56% in 2020. We ended the year with net cash of $22.7 million, and our gross debt at the end of the year was down to $33 million, and that will be paid off by the early August of this year. On the back of a strong financial performance, we paid out also a record dividend of 20 pence for the full year, up from 14 pence in 2020, and that's our highest annual dividend to date, and it includes a proposed final dividend of 12 pence, again up from 8 pence in 2020. We've already announced partway through this year our Q1 production to the end of March, and we're on track for this year's guidance as just reported. Copper was just over 3,000 tonnes, zinc at 5,240 and lead at 6,736 tonnes. We've also made good strides on our efforts in sustainability and improving the footprint of the company. We reported our 3rd standalone sustainability report and published that in Q2 fairly recently. And we have started initial reporting towards TCFD, and our climate change strategy is being developed. And one slightly disappointing note last year, we did have 4 LTIs. That's a lost time incident, whereas we only had 0 in 2020. We've already had 1 in Q1 2022. Turn to the next slide. This slide really just highlights that everything we do is driven by our purpose. And our purpose is to produce base metals which are essential for modern living profitably and in a safe and sustainable environment for all of our stakeholders. And that therefore feeds into our values of health and safety, looking after our staff on site, sustainability, efficiency and innovation, and respect and trust on site. And then that feeds into our objectives. We have short-term objectives and long-term objectives, focusing on sustainability, low-cost, high-margin operations, and ensuring that the money that we generate from those operations is prudently allocated to growing the business, paying back to shareholders, and paying debt down. And our long-term strategic objective is to grow the business, and we measure our success through management's KPIs, and management are rewarded on how they perform against those KPIs. Just a little bit more on caring for the environment. This has been a big focus within the company over the past few years. As I mentioned before, initial reporting towards TCFD. We have had board approval for a solar project in KOUNRAD to actually generate solar electricity and contribute towards the greenhouse gas emission reductions that we'll talk about in a minute. And our next step in terms of improving our sustainability reporting is to move in 2022 towards reporting scenario analysis, climate change scenario analysis. We're looking at that already. We had a meeting this week on that. And Scope 3 emissions will be reported in 2024. We've set some targets on water reduction. We're planning to reduce our abstraction at SASA of surface water by 75% by 2026. That's from a 2020 base. And our tailings, we've set targets to improve the way we environmentally store our tailings by 70%, again by 2026. And work is already in progress to hit the GISTM reporting deadlines for tailings management, and we'll have that done by 2024. And the final bit on the environment, very important, obviously, is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We reported for 2021 emissions of nearly 82,000 tonnes of CO2, and that's a reduction of around about 17%, primarily based on a renewable energy contract we signed in halfway through 2021 with EVN in North Macedonia. And we have a target to reduce that by 50% from the 2020 base by 2030. And there's a waterfall chart you can see there as to how we intend to achieve that over the next few years. Moving on to the KOUNRAD copper operation. Many of you know this operation. As I said before, it's been in production now for 10 years. We estimate that we still have 126,000 tonnes of recoverable copper to obtain. Most of that from the western dumps that you can see on the overhead aerial photograph shot there of the mine, and the eastern dumps around about 8,000 tonnes of recoverable copper. A few statistics on KOUNRAD. Very low cost operation, as many of you know. We reported an EBITDA margin of 80% at this operation, and also costs of 57 cents per pound of copper. That's around about $1,200 per tonne, and as many of us know, copper is currently selling in excess of $9,000 per tonne. I've already mentioned the guidance for this year, and our Q1 2020 prediction that we recently announced was on track to hit those guidance numbers. Moving on to SASA, zinc and lead mine in North Macedonia, another profitable operation for the group. We acquired this operation in November 2017 for just over $400 million. And since that time, it's generated EBITDA of $245 million. And the debt will be fully repaid, as I said before, in early August. And this particular operation has reserves and resources out to 2037. Again, as with KOUNRAD, a few of the statistics here is C1 cash cost is 63 cents per pound, and it generates an EBITDA margin of 56%. And there's a table there with some of the statistics going back to our ownership. The first full year of ownership of the CAML Group was 2018, marginally improving the ore mined and the plant feed and managing the metal output accordingly on those years that we've owned it. The guidance for this year, just to reiterate, is 20 to 22,000 tonnes of zinc and 27 to 29,000 tonnes of lead in concentrate. One of the things we've been doing quite a lot over the past year or so is working to improve the SASA mine, and it's what we call our cut and fill project. This project effectively is to change the method of mining at SASA from what is currently sub-level caving to a cut and fill method, and that has many benefits, one of which is improve the way we environmentally store the tailings. It's a safer method of mining, and it will improve the productivity and the amount of metal that we produce for the amount of ore that we particularly mine. There are three components to it. We're building a new decline that eventually will be 3.8 kilometers in length. To the end of the year, we developed 650 meters of that decline. And then there's the paste backfill. This is basically a plant that will use the tailings from the flotation plant and put them back underground, filling in the voids and therefore managing the tailings underground in the voids from which they came. And then there's the dry stack tailings aspect of it, which we're working on, which is putting the tailings into a cake form and placing them on the surface. There's an aerial photograph there of the SASA mine and the approximate areas of where the various parts of the project will be. Going back to capital allocation and how we use the money we generate from the operations to pay back to shareholders and delever on the balance sheet. We have got a strong record of returning money to shareholders, and our latest dividend, which I mentioned before, of 20 pence, but in total, the amount that we've paid back to shareholders since 2012, $256.9 million, or 132 pence per share. We have a policy whereby we pay back 30 to 50% of our free cash flow from the two operations, and last year's dividend represented 45% of that free cash flow. The waterfall chart you can see on the right is how we've paid the debt back from when we acquired SASA, and took on nearly $194 million of debt. And at the year end of that corporate facility, we had $23.4 million left. The $33 million I mentioned before was $9 million of overdraft as well. And as I said, that will be fully repaid by the early August of this year. So where does CAML go next? The big question we've got for ourselves is how do we deliver growth? So we've got a strong base from which to grow from. And if we look at the business moving forward, we need to now focus on business development to grow the business. We have a strong balance sheet. Size and liquidity in the marketplace remain an important consideration for us, as do all the other considerations we look at when we look at other projects around the world. We're looking for attractive commodity exposure. Copper is a particularly attractive metal in the market at the moment, but we are also open-minded to look at other base metals that will be used in the transition to a renewable economy. We're considering at the moment early stage exploration and putting a little bit more focus as a group onto early stage exploration, having now integrated SASA into the business and fully repaid the debt. Development projects and production projects, as ever, we look at those on a case-by-case basis to see if they make sense for CAML to acquire such projects and add value for our shareholders. Last couple of slides really is just our very supportive shareholder base that we have. There's a table there that shows some of the key shareholders, the institutions that have been with us throughout the past 10 years, on and off: Fidelity, J.O. Hambro, BlackRock. And in terms of the market coverage, we currently have 7 analysts who routinely cover CAML, and their logos are shown on the right there. Peel Hunt, who's on Nomad, BMO, RBC, Berenberg, ARC, or Alternative Resource Capital, VSA Capital, and Canaccord Genuity. So well covered in terms of analysts, and also a very strong shareholder base, as you can see. And the last slide is a picture, well, last but one, should I say, picture of the board of directors, which you can see some up on the screen there, and the slide showing the board that was introduced to you before. And so the outlook for CAML, we have a strong and a sustainable business. As I mentioned before, our strap line is producing metals that are essential for modern living safely and sustainably. We had a strong performance in 2021 with strong EBITDAs and free cash flows. We've got very strong discipline over our capital allocation priorities with a record dividend paid last year. A net cash position is at the end of 2021. And we're also using the money to implement and develop and improve the SASA mine with our cut and fill project, and looking for further growth opportunities for the group. The outlook for the year in many ways is uncertain, both from a macroeconomic position, which will impact on metal prices. But at the moment, the metal price is very favourable, and metal prices in the first quarter of this year have held up favourably for the metals that we produce. We will pay back our corporate debt by August 2022. And as I said before, we're working on many sustainability initiatives in terms of climate change, management, water, etc., etc. And so it's a strong outlook for the group. And on that note, I'll close the presentation and open it to questions either from the floor, I suspect, or from the online platform.
Thank you, Nigel. Yeah, we're very happy to take questions. I think if we can first ask anyone in the room if they have any questions for us. If there aren't any questions from the room, I'll move to the Investor Meet Company platform. I'll read the questions out, and then Nigel will answer them.
The board can help me.
So the first question we've got here is from Ramsey Joseph. He says he has invested in CAML since 2015, very happy with the company's progress and steady management. He's concerned about the remaining life of both operations at KOUNRAD and SASA having a limited life as published. How do you plan to counter the desertion by investors as we near the end of our reduction in production?
Reduction in production. Well, Ramsey, first of all, thanks very much for the question. I hear the slight concern, but I think as a board, we feel that lives of KOUNRAD out to 2034 and SASA to 2037 gives us plenty of time to use, having now paid the debt down fully, the surplus cash that we'll be generating from the businesses to look, as I said before in the presentation, for other growth opportunities. I don't feel that we're in a rush to do that, but we certainly recognise that there is a window to use that opportunity to actually grow the business and substitute that when they come to the end of their lives. But I don't think it's a major concern, and shouldn't be, certainly for our shareholders, as we're in a strong position to grow the business.
We've got a question from Steve, who says, as a shareholder, he was recently disturbed to see an announcement by Kazatomprom that some of its assets were to be privatised by the state. Does the board have any comment on the implications for CAML of this news?
To be honest with you, that's the first I'd heard of that particular announcement. Nurlan may know more of it on the board, but I don't think as a board we have any concerns that our asset in Kazakhstan would be nationalised. I think we're very comfortable operating in Kazakhstan. We've operated there since 2007 when we acquired the KOUNRAD asset, and we've got favourable relations in country and contacts in country, and feel fairly secure with our asset.
Thank you for the question. The news regarding Kazatomprom do not relate in any aspect to Central Asia metals. It's the internal dealings and business of Kazatomprom. And I would like to mention that the situation in Kazakhstan in general has improved since January. In January we had some turbulence, but now everything is stable and calm. And moreover, I wouldn't be surprised if we will see some IPOs from Kazakhstan in metals, in oil and gas sector, and potentially in aviation sector in particular. This Kazatomprom news do not have anything to do with Central Asia metals. Thank you.
Thanks, Nurlan.
Thanks, Nurlan. Our next question is from Matthew, who's asking what key milestones he should look out for the rest of the year.
Well, certainly one will be our half-year results, which will be early July, monitoring our progress throughout the rest of the year, and any particular specific announcements should we look to invest in other opportunities. Those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. And there will be moving ahead with the construction of the cut and fill project towards the end of the year to deliver that on track as previously announced. And we've got a question from Abby, who's asking whether we would look at share buybacks in the future.
Abby, this is something that we have considered in the past and rejected it on a number of times. Historically, we have done a share buyback, but I think that goes back to, remind me, Nick, it was probably 2012, I think it was, when we spent, I think, $2 million at the time because our shares were languishing despite having almost got into production and constructed the plant. So it is something from that time to time we do look at, and we look at it on a case-by-case basis depending on the value of the shares and what we think is the best thing for the company and the best use of our cash. Anybody else want to add anything on that particular point?
We've got a question from Ryan, who's asking if we have a hedging policy.
Ryan, that's a very topical question. Last year we did have a hedging policy as we have a capital build program that I mentioned before at SASA. At the moment we don't, and I don't suspect that we intend to, having fully paid down the debt and with low cost operations, we don't necessarily need to hedge in order to give us that kind of comfort should there be a decline in the commodity prices. So at the moment I think the board is comfortable sticking with spot prices and how we deliver our products into the marketplace.
And the last question I've got here is from Chris, who's asking how frequently do the CAML CEO and CFO visit North Macedonia and Kazakhstan annually?
I wouldn't like to give an exact number, but I can assure you that it is fairly regularly. Gavin was there, I think, only 2 weeks ago. I'm travelling out to North Macedonia next Wednesday to be on site. In fact, the whole board is coming to North Macedonia on the 6th, Monday the 6th of June. But in general answer to the question, a lot of the management team are often on site helping with the development of the cut and fill project and helping the management team on site. So I think we attend site both in North Macedonia. Kazakhstan is harder to get to, but we attend Kazakhstan as well in terms of being on site, and we do put a lot of effort into working closely with our colleagues on site and being with them quite often.
That's the last of the questions that we have on the Investor Meet company platform. Perhaps Nigel might like to give some final comments before we close the session.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you to everybody both online and physically here for attending. It's great to see people in person, physically, after the traumas that we've been through over the past few years. I'm delighted to report those results for CAML. We've had a record year, and the outlook also looks good for this year. So I think we're set for a good future for the CAML Group. So thanks to all the board, and thanks to everybody here for attending the AGM.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed for the board for updating attendees online today. Could I please ask attendees online not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the board can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the board of Central Asia Metals PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's annual general meeting, and good afternoon to you all.